This episode of Jim Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast is brought to you by MG Schlachter, a built environment and architectural consulting firm with an in-house production team. Delivering support services in the retail, hospitality, and residential sectors for leading brands worldwide, MG Schlachter is reinventing, something near and dear to my heart, of course, architectural support services. So look, let's say you're a worldwide fashion retailer and your new business plan calls for opening 450 new stores around the world this year. Or say you're an architecture firm and in order to grow, you need to staff up quickly to produce detailed drawing packages for your new winning project. Or dig this. Let's say you're a national hospitality brand who's putting together a new line of boutique hotels and you've got to produce a massive amount of graphics, such as custom artwork, posters, or slide decks, both in digital and print. MG Schlachter serves architecture and interior design firms, retailers, construction companies, graphic designers, and brand managers. And with the way they're reinventing architectural support services, they offer production and strategic consulting. Their in-house production team understands the importance of accuracy and precision and can demonstrate the utmost care throughout the drawing and delivery process. And on the consulting side, their team consists of architects and international design consultants with many years of experience in design and construction. Suffice it to say that whatever built environment or architectural project you're working on, MG Schlachter can step in and help accelerate your growth. So, if you're looking for a built environment and architectural services firm with an in-house production team to help you reinvent your next project, check out MG Schlachter. Find them on the web at mgschlachter.com. That's mgschlachter.com, mgschlachter.com. Hey, Reinventionistas, I'm excited to bring you this week's episode with Bobby Selvaggio, where we're talking artistry and entrepreneurship, or maybe was it artistry versus entrepreneurship? Well, you'll have to listen to the episode to see if we get into a beef about things, but also we're talking about the role of jazz labels these days as the digital world is shifting us around and what it's like to be a jazz saxophone artist on those labels these days, and what he's up to at Kent State University building their jazz program there. But before we get to the episode, I just wanted to thank everyone who responded this past week or so, past a week and a half or so, about podcast movement. So it gave me some ideas about show panels and stuff that will be down there at the show. So thanks for that. No promises to anyone out there, but who knows? Maybe your panel will show up at the show, your podcast panel. And speaking of that, I've been working on updating my own album cover or my art for the show. I think a little refresh is due for the artwork, and also since I'm going to be at Podcast Movement, I thought, let's make some stickers and refresh the cover art and see where it goes. So I've been working on that, so you'll start seeing that. Actually, I already put one version up, I guess, in Libsyn, and that's being distributed out. So if you look at the actual cover of the show these days, it's a little bit different than it used to be, a little bit cleaner looking, although similar. And I'll probably have another couple versions coming out. And like I said, I'm making some stickers. So if you see me out there or see me around or see me at another conference, maybe I'll have some stickers with me. And you can shake me down for one or two if you want one. Anyways, see you soon in Orlando, Florida. And while you're down there, make sure you stop by the Audimute booth at Podcast Movement and tell Kevin and Mitch I said hello. Tell them Jim Jim says hello and that you heard about them here on Jim Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. I know the podcast world is going to love these guys and what they're doing for sound management. And speaking of sound management, let's get to this week's episode with Bobby Selvaggio. You've got to check out his sound. This guy's an amazing alto saxophonist, jazz saxophonist, and he's got a new project called Reinvention coming out, which we talk about. And of course, we're talking artistry and entrepreneurship, so let's get to it.
Welcome to Jim Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, the show that explores reinvention in the digital age as it relates to career, creativity, and technology. Stay tuned for interviews with professionals, entrepreneurs, and creatives that have reimagined success and are making a pivot. If you'd like to listen to the entire back catalog, visit JimJim'sReinventionRevolution.com for instant access. And now, here's your host, Jim Jim.
Hey everybody, this is Jim Jim. Welcome to episode 55 of Jim Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. And I'm talking today with Bobby Selvaggio, and we're talking artistry and entrepreneurship. So Bobby, welcome to the revolution.
Thanks, Jim, for having me, man. This is going to be a blast.
Oh, well, you know what? We've been trying to, I think, now that I think back, set this up for a while.
It's probably been a minute, yeah.
Probably over a year or something like that. But
schedules, man.
Schedules, and just finding time to do it. But I think it's fortuitous or something that we're getting together now, because I know you have a new project or a new record coming out. You'll tell me what that is. That's called Reinvented, right?
Yeah. So I did a live record at a really well-known club here in Cleveland called the Bop Stop, and this will be my 11th record as a leader, and I just had never done a live record before, and so I was thinking about kind of how to do it, and this is an interesting time for me personally, for what I'm doing in my life as a musician and an educator, but also it's just interesting with how I kind of view things, and so that idea of reinvented just kind of is my way of looking at, as I just turned 50 recently. Okay. And so, you know, right. Man,
a milestone.
As we get older and we start thinking about, you know, what are we going to be doing at this point of our lives as we move forward, and it was just a concept that I've been thinking about, and that's kind of where that came about.
Right, cool. Well, you know what, let's circle back to that later, because I want to talk a little bit more about that, kind of who was on it, and, you know, how it came together and who wrote the music and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to dig into first this concept of artistry and entrepreneurship. And people should know, first of all, I guess, that you're one of the leading voices in alto saxophone, jazz alto saxophone. You can correct me if you don't like that description or not.
Well,
but
I
perceive you as that kind of person. And for me,
I've been on a scene a long time, so we'll say that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I like your style in that it's sort of it's integrated. You can hear some reference points, I think, in your playing, but it's always had a modern edge, and that's interesting to me, because I think I've always thought of jazz as a exploratory and a real free kind of music. I'm definitely not in the traditionalist crowd, and I know there's some people out there like that, but I always perceived it because of my interest in technology and advanced development, and the way I see the world. It's like I'm a kind of creative person at heart.
I'm in the individualistic crowd, man,
yes.
Which is, as an individual, you look to the past to influence the future. Mm-hmm. And so as a musician, quite honestly, that's just how I look at it. I mean, I have a voice that I try to get out, and the references that you're talking about is just the time I've spent studying this music. And if you don't do that, you won't hear those things, and you'll never have a complete, innovation doesn't come from nowhere.
Right.
I think people mistake that concept. They think, oh man, this person came up with this concept, he's the most amazing, and they might be a genius, and they might be the most amazing person in the world, but it doesn't come from nowhere. Innovation actually comes from years and years of looking at what people have done and continually thinking, what can I do with that? Where does this want to go? Let it lead me in a direction that I am looking at it this way. And I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I think from a technological standpoint, and I think from an artistic standpoint, it's important to look at things that way.
Right.
And that's, as a improvising jazz musician, those are the people I've always been drawn to. I mean, if you look at, Charlie Parker to Coltrane, of course, to Wayne Shorter, to players like that, they understood what came before, but they brought their own voice to it, and that's why the music is the way it is today.
Right. Well, it's when you talk about those kind of folks, there's always some kind of freshness to it. Obviously, they're competent, they're skilled, and all that kind of stuff. But the reason you're drawn to those kind of guys, it's like, oh, it's a little something different.
Yes, because it's not the same.
It's not quite the same. They were bringing something different to it.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we do live in a society where sameness is okay, it seems, in the popular aspect of things.
Right.
And
it's bankable. I mean, that's the reason.
Of course.
That's the reason why people do that. It's a commercial,
and it doesn't even
reality,
mean that it's good or bad.
Right.
It's interesting as musicians, we sometimes have these discussions about what music is good and what music isn't good and blah blah blah, and that to me is just not really important, because good music is good music, regardless of it. It's not about that, but it is the point that it is bankable. It does make people money, and there is a reason why, you hear popular music that sounds the same from tune to tune. Or I was just having this discussion with some musicians recently about this idea of arranging something versus covering something.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's a big difference.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
You hear covers on the radio all the time, and the thing is, it's like it's exactly the same. I mean, literally, they basically took the backing track from the original tune, and then the person singing it is doing everything exactly the same.
Right.
That's just a cover, and it might sound good, but it's still just a cover, and it might make a lot of money, but you know what? It's still just a cover. Versus that idea of arranging something where you're taking this thing and you're molding it your own way, where it's still the thing, but it becomes your own thing.
Yeah, building off the original idea somehow.
And so that concept, I mean, you could take that idea of a cover versus an arrangement and put it to almost anywhere. With some of the technology stuff that you've been talking about, I mean, just look at the innovation from that world. The difference between, look at cars. There are reasons why certain cars stand out more than other cars. This was another discussion I was having with somebody. They're like, man, every car looks the same today. And, not every car, it's like the ones that kind of have a special, and I'm not even a car person, so I'm not, but I'm just using that as an idea of, it's not art, but it is art. How do you bring art to all this other stuff? I'm digressing here, man.
Well, art is the differentiator. I think when you get to the end of the day, art's the differentiator. But before we go too much farther down this this rabbit hole, no, this is great. I mean, this is the reason why I wanted to have you on, because you have such interesting thoughts and experience about this, and it's an integrated experience, which I think is beneficial, which is why I wanted to talk about the artistry and entrepreneurship part. Is in addition to being on the scene and being a real working musician, producing all these records, working with record companies, which I want to ask you about, you're also an educator. Mm-hmm. And you've been at Kent State University. And what's your actual position there, so I get it right?
So I am the Director of Jazz Studies at Kent State.
Director of Jazz Studies. And it's a recent program that they've decided, maybe over the last 10 years, you were saying, decided to start offering a jazz major or minor, or start offering classes in that niche.
Yeah, so, I did my undergrad at Kent State 30 years ago. And Chaz Baker, who was my predecessor and one of my major mentors and close friends at this point, had been there for 30 years. He had always taught all the curriculum that would make up a jazz degree, this or that. They just never allowed him to have a jazz degree.
I see.
Which is that's a whole nother discussion maybe for another day with academia and jazz and academia. But
sure.
The right, perfect storm kind of happened, and they allowed him to build something jazz degree-wise. And so he brought me on part-time about 10 years ago or so, and we built a jazz minor. And then since then, I took over the program, just ended my 6th year of running it. We have a jazz major now. I just built speaking of entrepreneurial stuff, a music business class that's going to be starting. We're looking to have a music business minor soon. And so, it's at the point now where they're basically have been allowing me to do what I want.
Spread your wings within that.
Yeah, which has been kind of cool. So
wow, that's really cool. Yeah, so what were you doing before you started working at the university with Chaz? Were you just teaching independently? Were you just gigging? What draw you to the university atmosphere?
Yeah, Kent was an ideal and a very lucky situation for me. Not lucky because it's not like I didn't, earn it or anything, but just lucky in the way that up to that point, I had just been a part-time college teacher, teaching private lessons and playing full-time. And so that's what I had been doing. I've taught part-time college at Tri-C, at Akron, at Cleveland State, and at Kent State a little bit, at Cleveland Institute of Music, and then private taught for, private students for 25 years at various places. And,
right.
And so, from a teaching standpoint, that's what I had been doing. And it was nice to be able to get a full-time job at a college and just focus all my teaching at one place.
Right.
It's still it's still the same amount of work, but instead of, teaching at 2 colleges part-time and teaching at 2 music stores, throughout the week and then playing full-time, now I'm at one place teaching full-time and playing full-time. So.
Gotcha. Cool. So what was the transition like for you, or was there a big transition? I'm not sure there was necessarily, in terms of becoming a college professor, like in that environment, and like now that you're leading it, did you feel like you really kind of had to go through sort of a reinvention in that regard?
I mean, a little bit. There were administrative aspects of teaching full-time that were new to me. The interesting thing is, for me, all of my, like as a musician, and I'm sure we'll get into this idea of being an entrepreneurial, business-oriented musician, I just learned in the moment how to do all that. I didn't take business classes in college or this. I learned how to do all that stuff through the years by just doing it.
Right.
And it really was kind of the same thing at Kent State. I never took any classes to be an administrator. It was just kind of going in and learning on the fly and asking people for advice. And, I spent about almost 20 years ago, I said to myself, if you're going to do what you're going to do, you have to be incredibly organized and have everything together. And so I really started thinking about how to be an organized person in my life. And we can get into that, about what I mean by that. But like really to the point where I know every aspect of what's going on and what's coming up and what's going to happen. And so just in doing that, I kind of was already starting to think from an administrative type of living even back then as a musician. And so it was just, again, more of just understanding the ins and outs of it so that, okay, here we go. Now I know what to do.
Gotcha. Well, I think you said something there about learning on the fly, et cetera, and I think that's kind of what entrepreneurship is all about. Yeah. So it's like you have kind of a vision, but most entrepreneurs, when they're starting out, they have no idea what to do, how to do what they want to do. They have the vision. They're like, I want to do this, and the lack of knowledge does not stop them, right? Where if you're an entrepreneur at heart, the lack of knowledge is maybe exciting, or that's what's exhilarating about it.
It can stop people,
right,
but it shouldn't stop people for everything you just said. It's if there's a reason why everybody doesn't do what certain people do,
right,
it's because they look at all that and they go, I just can't do all that.
Right.
When the reality of it is, what you just said is, if it's part of something that you're incredibly passionate about, you get excited about, okay, I have to figure out how to do that so that I can make this thing happen. Oh, okay, now I know how to do that. Cool. Here we go. Next.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of mentality.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, exactly. And that sort of maybe helps you define your, kind of who you are. You have to be sort of self-aware of like, if I'm afraid of all those things, maybe I'm better as being an employee or in this other structured environment.
Right.
And the people that, don't have that view, then they're the entrepreneurs, et cetera, whatever.
Exactly. And that's a really good point. You're making me think about something. I don't know if I've ever put it this way, but I think this is kind of the difference, is that, a businessman and an entrepreneurial person aren't necessarily the same thing.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur, you have to live in the business world, but I actually think entrepreneurs are artists at heart. Whether they do an artistic endeavor, it's the mentality of an artist, which is the creativeness of something. And I think people don't understand that. What is to be entrepreneur, or entrepreneurial in nature, is that it's just not, okay, I understand some aspects about business, and so I'm going to be an entrepreneur. No, an entrepreneur is a creator. Right. An entrepreneur is an innovator. An entrepreneur is somebody that they come up with the vision and they figure out how to make that vision happen. And that is a big difference between that and just being I'm not saying just being, but you know what I mean, just being a business person, where it's like you have a job and this is what you do in the job. Where it's more of, you these things you have to accomplish by the end of the day, and then you go home, and that's cool. But that there's a difference between that and somebody that actually creates everything about it.
Yeah, I would say in the business world or the tech world, you often find that you have founders of companies that are the technology visionary, the real entrepreneurial spirit, et cetera. And then you might have the CEO or the COO or the chief marketing officer, whatever it is. And those guys are super business people and they're executors, but it's not quite the same as the visionary or that entrepreneurial part.
Those cats
that
are
does
taking
the creative.
your vision and helping you to move it forward.
Right, exactly. So, so you articulated. I thought we were going to have some controversy here because when I say this to other musicians or other people. When I talk about artists, I view them literally as entrepreneurs. Like it's almost one and the same.
It is,
and
you have to
when
be
people,
that way.
When I talk to people, some people that feel like I don't know. When you say the word artist, I think some people think or imagine that it's some kind of real weird creative person or flakiness or something or whatever. They don't perceive it as this business person. Yeah. And I'm like, no, entrepreneurs are.
They're not a business person. They're everything we just talked about.
But there's something about them that want to get their message out there. Yeah. That want to find an audience.
They are artists
right?
in a way. It doesn't have to be an artistic thing, but you have to have that mentality to be an entrepreneurial person.
Yeah. Well, right. And so like the artists that we know of that are, famous or that rise to the top, they have part of that entrepreneurial spirit, whatever, because
every single one.
They're looking to
in the
create,
jazz world,
right?
in the pop world. Look at Justin Timberlake. Man. I would love to use him as a great example. I think he is an absolutely phenomenal musician.
Right, yes.
And an artist. Mm-hmm. But he is equally as craft at being an entrepreneurial nature. I mean, this cat knows how to make it happen on every level.
Right.
And I mean, to do the music that he does, which jazz musicians, Justin Timberlake, everybody goes, "Oh yeah, man, that cat's bad. He can play. Mm-hmm. He knows what he's doing."
Sure.
But then you look at it, the fact that for the rest of the world who doesn't know anything about that, he's still just as heavy.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about that. That's pretty deep, man.
Yeah, it is.
And there
deep.
have been, there are people in that world and other types of musical type things that they do that, and they are entrepreneurial in nature. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, cool, man. Well, so now that we got that that topic covered, and kind of explained out there, tell me what you're doing at Kent State to foster this, I guess. Yeah. Because I think right now, the reason it's so interesting to me now is that this has always been the case, I believe, throughout history, et cetera. But right now, with the whole sort of technology that's, eating society at large here, right? And that has swallowed up the music business recently, right? As well as many other businesses, retail, brick and mortar, and all this kind of stuff. I think it's really helped to unleash the idea of, hey, we all need to be more entrepreneurial. We all, especially as music artists, right? Yes. Especially as music artists, right? You just have to be now. So tell me what you're doing at Kent State and your vision of what you're doing over there.
The thing about the academic world, and just speaking about the music academic world, is that, this isn't about, I'm not trying to be negative or anything here, is that the music world from a collegiate standpoint has not done a real good job of preparing music students, whether they are performance or education or whatever they are, to succeed in the real world, except for very particular things. Mm-hmm. So for example, you take classical lessons at the college level, you learn all this repertoire, and this repertoire, you learn it so that if you do auditions, you can, get those auditions. Okay. Well, in the grand scheme of things, it's like, how many major orchestras are there? There's 20 or less of major orchestras in this country. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of music students graduating these schools, all vying for maybe a dozen gigs at any one given time.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
Maybe. Mm-hmm. And so those odds aren't very good. Right. So you don't get that gig. What do you do? Okay, well, then I'll teach. And again, teaching is a great endeavor, but going, when you're going to school to teach students to end up just being more teachers to teach more students to teach more students in that endless cycle.
Right.
man, that's not really doing anything for the creative aspect of what music is about. And so I'll leave my little rant, if you will, there. I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's kind of how it works.
Yeah.
And so there are a very small number of schools that are starting to look at how to prepare students better. And I'm sure I'm not naming them all, but I'm just going to name a couple few here just to kind of prove my point. If you look at what Berklee has been doing, they have this great, I think it's literally just called professional music, one of their degrees, which is more of a, take core music classes and then build your personal degree around that, which is a great concept. But they're doing a lot of entrepreneurial aspects. New School in New York, the Frost School at Miami, Harvard, even with Vijay Iyer, is doing some really progressive things. And I'm sure there are others I'm just leaving out. But there's a small handful of schools doing things across the whole country. And what I'm trying to do at Kent is make the program at Kent be a leader in the Midwest for this, because there's not really much of that happening in this area. And so I'm looking to create a creative music and entrepreneurship department at Kent that would combine many things, to all my jazz programs, to like a classical new music ensemble, to possible, film scoring stuff, to possible musician wellness, to all of the, entrepreneurial business type classes, and put them all within a single entity where students can look to get a degree in the aspects of more being creative with your music. And it's not just about jazz. It can be a classical musician, it could be a singer-songwriter, it could be a pop musician, it could be anything, jazz musician. And so the idea is to allow students to explore the creative side of being a musician more, and then understand the entrepreneurial aspects of then how to take that and be successful in the real world. And that is a very general way of looking at what I'm trying to do at Kent State. And so we'll see what happens. But that's where I think schools need to be heading to prepare students. I mean, all that other stuff is important. Like as a classical musician, you could still take all your, repertoire applied lessons. You could still do your classical ensembles, but you would still then be able to tap into the creative aspects of it, so that if you don't get that one orchestra gig, you can still know how to compose music, create a new music ensemble on your own, commission works, do new music from a chamber standpoint, and then understand how to take that and promote it and roll with it, so you can basically build your own brand and go from there, and not rely on outside sources to be successful.
I see. Yeah, I really like the idea of building your own brand, which, again, because we're connected in these different ways now through social media and all this stuff, it just
that leads us into that whole discussion.
It's an obvious
how do you
thing
with social media.
Yeah, it's an obvious thing that you need to do, and whether you intend to do it or not, the fact of the matter is that you are a brand now. In the world, like the way you interact with people and just whatever you're doing out there. So,
I mean, you've always been that, but with social media today, it's just so much more accessible, man. Yeah, I mean, the immediacy of everything today is ridiculous, man. For people like us that have been doing things for longer than 25-year-olds, they don't understand how we used to have to do things.
Oh, right.
And the immediacy of everything today, it's just like, what's going on, man?
Right. Well, that's a whole separate discussion.
Yeah.
But let me ask you something. You said you want to focus on the creative aspect of being a musician, and it kind of made me think of two things. First thing was, I think some people think about learning to be a great musician, they focus on chops. They focus on their skills, like the real hardcore skills. It's like, I'm going to play the fastest, the loudest, I'm going to know the most, theory or whatever it is. And I think over the last maybe, I don't know, to me, maybe 20 years or so, like that's been a real focus of a lot of music, and especially maybe in jazz in a way, right?
Of course, yeah.
Where it's like, like, like metal came on the scene in the 80s and there was a bunch of like, shredding metal guitarists, right? I feel like that in some ways applies to some of the saxophonists out there today where like they're shredders, they're amazing technicians, but the music is falling flat to me a little bit,
I just posted something on Facebook about this very thing. I don't know if you saw it, but the general gist of it was we don't practice things to play it. We practice things because we might want to play it at some point in time.
Okay,
there's a difference between those two things, and that's that kind of improvisational driven approach and process versus like a repertoire driven process or approach.
Right.
Where from a repertoire standpoint, you learn that one thing for that one situation, and it has to be done that way every single time. Versus from an improvisational standpoint, this isn't even a jazz thing. This is just from an improvisational standpoint where it's like we learn every one thing we learn it to be able to do it anyway at any given time in any situation. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
And so, this idea of chops, I mean, all that is important. I mean, if you're going to be successful, you have to be the best at what you do. And that includes being mastering the technical aspect of your instrument, mastering the understanding of the music that you are playing, which includes things like theory and all that stuff. I mean, that is important. You have to have that together. But you have it together not because you're going to do it. It's because you might do it a certain way. And I don't think younger musicians understand that. You hear, I think, some younger jazz musicians in the world today, and the thing is, just speaking of jazz as a jazz musician myself, the jazz world is just, inundated with, oversaturated with musicians today, more than ever, and it's just going to get worse because, these schools are putting out so many unbelievable musicians.
Yeah. Yeah, real technicians and people that can just play their butt off.
And I'll listen to some, and it's like they're unbelievable players, but it's like they're not saying anything to me, man. Because they're just basically, it's all, like all the stuff they learned, they're having to get it out. And there's a difference between that and just having all this stuff together and what's your situation and playing to that situation. And that's where the real creative aspects of music happen, is when you have the ability to play anything, but you're only playing what's needed for that situation. And when you can get to that point, then, and that whether you call that maturity, whether you call that whatever you call that, that's where the real creative aspects of music. And it's important to teach this. So this idea back to bring back around to your question is, why do we, what's with the creative music aspect of this thing is that it's them understanding how to use all these tools they do in a way that will make them successful as a performer, as a producer, as a promoter.
Right.
Well,
exactly. So, you have that feeling too, I guess, a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I like what you're trying to build over there in terms of the creative part, where it made me think of, that sort of chops thing that I was thinking about, but also I have a reference point for you. I don't know if you know this guy out there. Casey Niestat?
I don't.
He's a video YouTuber artist.
Okay. Yeah.
But it makes me think of like, if you're moving into this digitally connected world, right? He's found a way. Like he wanted to be a movie maker. He, fancied himself as trying to do all this stuff. And so he creates, short little videos and has really figured out a creative way to approach all the digital technologies, everything that's going on out there. He's been able to create his own studio, his own brand, etc. Like he's really a great reference point of an example of, yes, he's got, good chops. He knows how to use all the technology, right? He's got great vision. He does all this stuff, but he brought this creative aspect that is undeniable and has separated him, from anyone else out there who's doing this kind of stuff.
That's the key, man.
And yeah, that's
we can't be successful if you say, I need to have this one gig, and if I don't have it, I'm not successful.
Right.
That doesn't mean anything anymore.
Right.
That mentality was never really a thing ever anyways. But it was what was promoted.
Right. Yeah.
But the thing is, that doesn't mean anything. What that really truly doesn't mean anything anymore. because in today's world, there's so many things that you can do that are the same thing as that, but not that.
Right.
And if you don't understand that you have to approach life in general from a standpoint of, this is what I'm going to be good at, this is how I do it, I'm going to bring it to the world, then everything is going to be unsuccessful for you.
Right.
It can't be about outside stuff. It has to be about inside stuff. Mm-hmm. And when you make it about inside stuff, meaning when you make it about who you are, what you know you are passionate about, what you want to bring to the world, and then taking that and bringing it to the world versus looking at one situation. And if I don't do all of this in that one situation, I've done nothing. That again, it just doesn't work that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I hope that makes sense.
It does. Well, it reminded me of, the tagline for the show. If you look at the album cover of the podcast, so I say, interviews with people reimagining success in the digital world. Yeah. And I was just talking to a buddy of mine a week ago, and he finally, Tom, he finally looked at the album cover and read that tagline. He was asking me about it. He's like, "What does reimagining mean?" He thought that was an interesting term, right. And I thought, well, I think it's the right way to think about the world now, because maybe in the 20th century or historically, like you said, you had these real things that were promoted that you were imagining success is this narrow channel. If I don't get to be the principal violinist in this orchestra, I'm nowhere, or whatever it is, right? Or if I can't play Birdland in New York City, there's no way I can be successful as a jazz musician, whatever it is. But I think now it's really a time to reimagine, like, what success is, or figure it out for yourself.
Because success is a very individual thing,
right? And
we have to look at it that way.
Right.
You can't look at success as being one. John Coltrane played with Miles Davis. Well, how many musicians didn't play with Miles Davis? It doesn't necessarily make them less successful,
right?
Or whatever, or I didn't play with Miles Davis. I mean, whatever. I mean, it can't be about that one thing. Success is about what you make for yourself and what you bring to the world, and that's all that matters. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't even think success is, do people like that? Is that something that a million people view as great? That's not being successful. Being successful is being honest and true to who you are and bringing that to the world. And if you've done that, you're successful, as far as I'm concerned. Because there are, you can't put, barriers, or not barriers, bars on what is successful, what isn't successful. I just don't believe that. Because if you do that, then how many people aren't successful in this world? I mean, and that's just not true.
Right.
There's no, this bar is it. It's just that kind of stuff doesn't mean
those are
anything
goals, or, sort of things metrics to measure, but it's just a component of it. That's all it is, right? Well, cool. So when is this curriculum rolling out? Are classes together already?
So for example, all of this kind of creative music stuff and all of that, we'll kind of see, this is my vision for the school, and I'm starting to bring it to them.
Okay.
And Kent State just got a new director to the School of Music, very forward-thinking person, and I can say who it is, Kent McWilliams, who I think is going to do wonderful things there. And we're at a point at the School of Music's life here where we are about to reimagine and reinvent how the school is going to be perceived moving forward. And I think there's a lot of faculty and people within the whole School of the Arts and the School of Music that are really interested in things moving more in this direction. And so I think within the next few years, you're going to see some really major things coming out of the School of Music. I mean, we have a music business class now, which is completely new. I created this class last summer. And, as it goes through the levels of academia to get into the place, so we're going to be starting that and moving forward with it. Everything else are things that should be happening within the next few years.
I see. Well, exciting times over there.
Yeah.
And, I can tell ever since you, kind of got put in place over there that there's just been more energy and more focus to those programs. So thank you for building it.
Man,
Thanks for your efforts and all the efforts that and the great staff. You got great staff and faculty over there.
Yeah.
Which, in part you've been able to attract because of your efforts. So cool stuff going on here. And you know what? Cleveland's always been, or Northeast Ohio, just, for people that are listening out there in the world, it's always been a really great place to develop yourself. Great talent here. Great talent comes from here historically. I mean, It's just, when I've moved around and lived other places, like, I always think like, there's just more of a soulful hipness to this area than most other parts of the country,
Yeah. I don't think people understand. Northeast Ohio is a really intriguing place on many levels. I mean, first of all, just from a standard of living. I mean, I lived in New York City for a few years back in the 90s, my wife and I. And, I love New York, and I love going back and playing and hanging out and all that. But I wouldn't trade anywhere else here. I mean, just from an affordability standpoint, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, right.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
From a things to do, I think there's as much to do around here as anywhere else, and in some ways more. I mean, I don't think people outside of Northeast Ohio in general know about some of the major things, like our park system. The park systems are some of the largest in the country. When you have things like the hospital systems are some of the top in the country. Playhouse Square, the theater district, is like second to Broadway as far as size and scope. You look at the Cleveland Orchestra. You look at our art museum. The Cleveland Museum of Art was ranked number 1 recently. You look at even just like the sports teams. You look at the Rock Hall of Fame. You look at the technology from even a NASA standpoint. I mean, you look at John Glenn with what's happening with technology there is major. So there's so many aspects to what's happening here that's deep that people just don't know. And then from an artistic standpoint, our jazz scene is starting to become known through some of the work of myself and some of the great musicians living in this area today. I mean, Theron Brown, Chris Coles, Sam Blakesley, who just moved to New York, but Sam, things he's done. There's a good core group of musicians that are creating new music and doing entrepreneurial things that have just not happened here. And it's pretty heavy, and all the collaborations we're doing with musicians from around the world coming here to play, our venues, the Bop Stop in Cleveland and Blue Jazz in Akron, are bringing in unbelievable artists. And so this scene here is, the classical new music scene is heavy here. Mm-hmm. Heavy.
Right.
Like chamber, classical chamber music, new music is heavy here in Northeast Ohio. And so it's pretty ridiculous, this area, and I think people are starting to figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking about new things that are bubbling up, new things that are happening, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about this new project that just so happens to be called Reinventing.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's dig into this a little bit more and tell me a little bit more about why you conceived the project, who's on it, and when is it out? Is it released yet, or what's going on with it?
Yeah, so. Well, first of
coming
all,
soon, I guess.
Yeah. No, I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
So the whole concept of the record. So this I did a live record at the Bop Stop.
Okay.
And this will be my 11th record as a leader, which I'm pretty proud of. I mean, that's it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And so the whole reinvented thing was just as I get to the point where I am in my life, I need to think about what I've done and where I want to go. And so just turning 50, that's it's a pretty good milestone there, and I really am truly at a point. It's life is ironic sometimes. It really is all this stuff that I've been doing for 20, 25 years as a musician, creating music, entrepreneurial, blah, blah, blah. But then now with what I'm doing at Kent and trying to build this degree to pass that on, there's this time in my life now where it's I'm doing things where I'm trying to put an infrastructure together to pass on what I've been doing and I'm going to continue to do to others in a very structured way. And so this whole idea of reinvention is just really trying to reinvent who I am as a person, let alone as a player and a writer and a producer and, et cetera. And so that's kind of where that came from.
I see. Was there something that you did different on this record because of it, or?
Yeah, I mean, just I think the way I'm writing and I think the way I'm playing now is really moving in different directions for me, and so as all my records, I did all the writing and arranging, except for I did an arrangement of the Beatles' Blackbird, so I do have like one pop tune on it.
Gotcha.
That I brought into the jazz world, but everything else is a new original music of mine.
What's the instrumentation on this record?
There's a core quartet that I use. That's Theron Brown on piano, Zaire Darden on drums, and a good friend of mine from Pittsburgh, Paul Thompson, on bass.
Okay.
That's kind of the core, with myself on alto, sax, and pedals, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So there's a tune on here that I use effects pedals, and that's, I think, part of the reinvention, too. We can talk about that more if we have time. But so that's the core group. Dan Wilson, who's a phenomenal jazz guitar player, is on a couple tunes. And then there were a couple tunes where I was doing more of a kind of chamber ECM jazz setting, and I did some arranging with a quartet of flugelhorn, clarinet, horn, and bassoon.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And this beautiful, warm sound that accompanies the quartet. And so that's the instrumentation on the record. And so, man, it was really an interesting experience, just having not done a live record, but having played, as same as you, thousands of, live gigs through the years. But man, it's like now it's recorded and there for everybody to see from now to the end of time.
Right. And so was it for a particular label, or are you producing it yourself?
No, so I've been on a few labels through the years.
Okay.
Playscape, Arabesque, Origin. And now I'm on Dot Time Records.
Dot Time Records, okay.
And so the previous record I did was my first with Dot Time. It was called Quantum Man, which was interesting because it was a jazz quartet with a string quintet and voice and percussion. Okay. And that record did great, man. It was a best of 2017 and downbeat, and really well received internationally. And so I'm really excited with this one. So Dot Time Records, the official release date is October 4th.
Okay.
I should have, copies well before that. But, the way those record labels work is they'll produce the record, but then they, part of the promotion of it is they get some radio play, they do some, they get a couple reviews, they do all of this stuff before the actual official release from the label.
Right.
Because that's part of how you promote the release, But that, so Dot Time Records, October 4th is when it will be released.
I see. And what's it like, I guess, working with labels these days? Or, like it's such a different universe. Like, what's the role that you see that they play versus the role that you might want to, promote or be creative on your own in this respect? Like, how do you think about it? And what do they really do these days? Yeah,
it's changed a little through the years. And a lot of people are obviously doing more independent things. I mean, Dave Douglas, who's one of the great jazz trumpet players today, started his own label called Greenleaf Records out of Chicago. So there are people doing that and just self-releasing records. I've enjoyed taking, this is a horrible way of putting it because I don't mean it like this, but taking advantage of the record labels, because there are, from a media standpoint, a radio standpoint, a venue standpoint, there are advantages of being on a record label. They sometimes look at those records differently.
Sure.
A radio station is going to play your record more if you're on a label, or you are a 1%er that's done your own stuff and putting it out. But the vast majority of people just aren't getting radio play because people don't know who they are and they're not on a record label. Same thing with, booking certain gigs and all that. So that's been part of why I've liked using labels myself.
I see.
I've been very fortunate in all of my situations. There are different ways that labels do things. Some of my early labels, the artist would create a mastered copy on their own money, and then you would hand it off to the record label, and they would cover all the post costs, all the production costs and promotional costs. And then the contract would, you'd earn a certain amount of money off the records. The label would earn a certain amount of money. If they make their money back, and they're still selling your records, you make more money. I mean, that kind of thing, which is, for jazz musicians, especially somebody like myself, that's a great deal. Because we all laugh, and it's the same thing with some of the great musicians today that I've had discussions with. Man, nobody's paying their mortgage off of record sales in the jazz world.
Right.
They're literally
if they ever were.
Maybe Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock and cats like that. But I ain't them, and most of us aren't them. So we're not making our mortgage off that. So that's how labels were. It changed a little bit. We were talking earlier a little bit about the digital media and this and that. When I was with Arabesque Records, I did some really good. I mean, I had a Modern Times record, which is a great record. Went pretty deep in the second to last round of the Grammy nominations and stuff like that. That record did really good. Great radio play. But after that, so the way it works is, a record label will make 1,000 records. That's pretty standard to start with.
Okay.
And that 1,000 records, a quarter of them go towards promotional stuff you don't even see. And then, half of them the record label keeps because they're sending it to distribution places and stuff like that. And then the other half or so, the artist will attain through time to sell for themselves. And that's pretty standard-ish, And so with Arabesque, the last record I did with them, which was called Way of Being, when I was getting ready to do it, the head of the label in discussions was like, listen, we're just not going to do records anymore.
Right.
CDs, we're not making
kind of surprised they do in a way.
Yeah.
These days.
Yeah, I mean, these days, they actually, I'll get to this.
Other than for promotional purposes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
Right.
so exactly. So, but they weren't making any. And at that point, that was pretty new. We're talking, 10 plus years ago, which doesn't seem like a lot of time, but these are recent things.
Yeah, right, sure.
And so they were like, we're not going to do it. They just went all digital. And I'll be honest, I wasn't really happy with that. But my only choice at that time was I went to Disc Makers, which is kind of the leader in record, producer, production, and I made my own. Mm-hmm. And I have to admit, I still have quite a few, of that record left. I probably made more than I should have.
Yeah.
But that's what I did. I wanted to have them. And to my fault, I made too many.
Right.
I wasn't up to the times yet.
Yeah,
then.
right.
I made 1,000 still myself. The reality of it, I probably should have made 500, and I would have been out of them at this point. But I still probably have half of them, to be honest. It just is what it is.
Right.
And so, because before that, and now, and I'll get to that time in a second, but before that, 500 was enough. All the gigs and touring that I do and all this, I would sell out of them, and my record labels, they sold out of whether sending it off again to distribution or selling it through the label. They would sell them. And so that I should have done that. But anyways, so that kind of changed. And then I wasn't too happy with that. And so for my next record after that, which was called Short Stories, I joined a label that I had been on as a sideman on other projects called Origin Records, which it's a great record label out of Seattle. They they get downbeat recognition as, they've been in the top 10 for a few years now. It's a great record label. Their way of doing things is I don't know what there may be official terms out there. I don't know, but I think of it as like a buy-in.
Okay.
Right. So what that means is you produce the record up to a mastered copy, and then when you send it to the label, you pay them to then do all the production, promotion, and everything else. Okay. And then you either make your money back or you don't through sales of records and all that.
Right.
And that the record labels, there are a few that do it that way because that's how they, stay in business.
Yeah.
That's their business model.
That's right, yeah.
Regardless of what you think of it, that's just the way it is. I did one record with them, and the record did well. I didn't make my mortgage on that one either. And that whole buy-in thing, for me, I didn't like that. Just personally. Nothing, the label's great. It was just a personal thing. So after that record with them, I just didn't want to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. That was just a personal decision. And so I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then when I did Quantum Man, I have, some friends, musician friends that are on the scene, and not a good friend, but a friend of mine that I've known for years through other people, Phil Markowitz, who's a great jazz piano player, has played with Joe Lovano and Dave Liebman and some pretty heavy people. Him and another friend recommended Dot Time Records. And so I met with and talked with Dot Time, and they actually have been doing things kind of on that older model where it's you produce up to a mastered copy, you send it off to them, and they cover all the post cost.
I see. Okay.
The things they're doing different now, though, like Quantum Man did great. They were happy. We're basically out of all the CDs at this point, so that's good for everybody.
Yeah.
And but now what they're doing, they made 1,000 records, but now this time for this upcoming record, they're just going to do 500. Mm-hmm. And their roster, it's a little smaller now, so they have fewer people on their roster, and I'm very thankful to still be on it.
Right.
And so they can put a little more money into promotion. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of their model, but they still cover the post cost, and I like that because it saves me money.
Right.
I'm okay.
A little bit less risk or whatever for you, right?
Yeah. And so, they know from, the way this record's going to do from my last record, they're going to sell out. They're going to make their money back. And, for them, they have certain things that they do really well with. And for certain artists like me, if they break even, man, they're cool with that because they do a lot of reissues and stuff like that, and they do really good business with that. So for them, their model is they just did a huge Louis Armstrong Legacy series.
I see.
That's going to do unbelievable. And so there are fewer artists on their roster that are doing new creative music. Mm-hmm. They still want to do that, and they may make a little bit of money or they break even, and for them they're happy. That's how they're still successful.
Yep.
And so that's how that's going to work with this record. And
do they give you any direction or
no.
Suggestions in terms of like, hey, we'd like a live record, or
no,
or could you do something like this?
I'll be honest with you, none of the labels I've been on have done that.
Okay.
Listen, there are like the labels I've been on they're top tier labels, but like they're the second tier of the top tiers. They're not Verve, they're not Blue Note, they're not those, but they're like that caliber, but not considered that caliber. Let me put it that way.
I see. Would those top labels give you more direction?
Like, for example, Blue Note, the way Blue Note has gone is, and I can't remember all the little subsidiary names of the different labels, but basically Blue Note has like fractured into, they have the main one, which does less new, really heavy, creative, modern new music jazz.
Right.
They have these other labels, like subsidiary labels, that are still Blue Note, but it's like, Blue Note New or something. I can't remember what they're called, but, but what they do is those labels ask you to do a record. Okay. Like you can't go to them, they come to you and say, I want you to do a record. Now, I don't know how much of it they may work with you and say, maybe these are the trends we're seeing. You might want to do something like this or that. But I think for the most part in the jazz world, artists still have the final say.
I gotcha.
I still think. Maybe, I don't know. I just don't, I'll be honest, I just don't know. But there may be like a Diana Krall or somebody like that. I'm not even sure who she's on right now, Verve or something like that.
Yeah.
That... maybe, it's like, listen, Diana, you've done really well just doing Great American Songbook stuff. You're not going to do a new, and whether she could or wants to or whatever is beside the point. But somebody like that's a moneymaker doing standards, Great American Songbook.
Sure.
And that's what she's going to do.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, where it's like, there's this niche in the market that we could sell this. You're in a business, so you're sort of like trying to produce product for that niche. it's not super creative or whatever, but that's just the way kind of things are.
I think that's just more of a everybody involved. This is what I like to do. It does well. Continue to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, but like for me personally, no. I mean, it was interesting though for my record is, Quantum Man was great. You know, he was like, you know, let me know what you want to do in the future. You know, blah blah blah. So I called him up and was like, hey, you know, I want to do this live record, and they were like, yes. You know, they were actually. It was just coincidence that they are interested in doing more live. They released a Joey Calderazzo live record, which is pretty heavy. And so that worked out great. We were on the same page without knowing it, you know. So, but no, I mean, it's like a complete artistic freedom as far as for me.
Okay, cool.
And I would never do anything other than that. I just don't have any interest. I have no interest in doing it.
That's your vision or your vibe or whatever you want to do.
Personal vision.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. Yeah. Sure. Awesome. Okay, well, you know, we have a few minutes left before we get out here, but there's always a couple questions I like to ask people that come on the.
I'll try to give you shorter answers
on the
man.
podcast.
I'll get going.
No, it's all right, man. This is all good. Man, I could talk to you for days, dude. I mean, there's so many things we can cover, and just so much experience and interesting things that you have. But in terms of, you know, thinking about the world the way it is today, that's why I was asking about like what are the roles of these record companies these days, et cetera, because of all the technology, the way it's changed. How do you look at the role of technology, either in your, you know, artistic endeavors in terms of producing products and those kind of things, or even in the educational part of like what you should be teaching? You know, is there something about the technologies these days that are overwhelming or really challenging? How do you think about the technological aspects?
Man, that's an interesting question. I'll be honest, I'm not a tech geek or anything like that. So mostly when it comes to that stuff, I rely on putting people around me that understand it better than I do. But for me, I think the first and foremost, and we've mentioned a little bit this idea of the really social media today, is that's a technology, and it has affected every aspect of the world. Especially from an artistic standpoint, and just coming to grips with understanding that's been a personal thing for mine. I mean, we grew up in generations that, you know, computers weren't even really a thing, let alone, again, all this stuff that's just amazing today. I know it makes me sound like an old person, but I mean, I understand social media. I think I use it well for what I want to use it for. But there's so many people I mean, it's literally become... You can have yourself heard to millions of people from your room, and literally build a career and a life around that. That really stuns me, and still today. And so, you know, and people that do that well, that becomes a business, and they do well with that. So that aspect of social media, I use it more just strictly for promotional things, because I still like to live in the live world of performing and all of that. Sure. You know, when it comes to studio stuff or this or that, you know, or those kinds of technologies, for me personally, the funny thing is, you know, a lot of the microphones I like to use are more of the old school microphones. And I think that's the case for most engineers and most musicians. They end up going back to much more old school things and stuff like that. And then, you know, from a business standpoint, I think it just goes back to, you know, this music business class that I built for the school. I based it off of 3 main concepts, you know, 15-week course, 3 main concepts. And the 3 main concepts are creating a project, funding a project, promoting a project. And it's built around that concept. And so, you know, from a technology standpoint, I think it's all about immediacy and having artists understand that everything you do is under this immediate, you know, scope, if you will, where for example, there are certain artists when they perform live, they don't like everybody doing the videos and posting those videos because for many reasons. They don't like it for financial reasons because they feel like their music is out there in the world and they're not getting anything in return from a financial standpoint. Right. But there is also an aspect of they're building their brand, they're building a reputation, they're building this, and if things don't quite go right on a thing, now all of a sudden there are, millions of people looking at, this one gig out of the million you play a year, some weird thing happened, and they go, oh, that cat, what's going on?
Right.
And so there are that aspects to it. It's really interesting how we have to think about how we present ourselves every moment of our lives as artists because of the technology and social media today.
Right. Well, think about it.
Yeah,
seriously, because it can, your normal life can bleed over into your artistic life or your business life, and vice versa, right? Yeah. It's kind of interesting. Well, that kind of leads into a little bit to my next question in terms of, in dealing with this stuff and being able to wrap your head around it and figure it out. How do you continue to keep an open mind or keep embracing this, like you're saying, like, hey, I'm going to start integrating this entrepreneurship aspects. Maybe people need to learn more about all the social media stuff, wrap their head around it. How do you keep your mind open, kind of on a daily basis when
personally speaking?
when you get thrown, all the stuff gets thrown at you? Because I know the feeling can be quite overwhelming. Like,
yes.
Oh man, here's a new thing I got to learn.
Yes.
Or here's something that changed that I used to do it this way, and I can't do it anyway, this way anymore because that technology company's out of business or whatever it is.
Well, I'll answer it from this standpoint from an artist standpoint. Is what is really overwhelming is how to keep your craft together and at a high level while dealing with all this other stuff. That's the angle that I want to get across, because from a technology standpoint, again, there are people that live in it like yourself or younger people than me that understand just the actual technical parts of the technology today better than I do. But I think for artists, the key is how to understand how busy and how intense it is to be that type of artist today. Because you can be many different types of artists. You don't have to live anywhere in the technology world to be an artist today.
Right.
You can be somebody that they just like to literally play music, and so they'll do restaurant gigs. They'll play a big band gig every now and then. They're not writing music. They're perpetual sidemen. They're just living in that world, and they make a great career, and they're incredibly happy, and that's wonderful. That's a good career.
Right.
But if you want to live in that, and I use this word being creative because it's not like those types of musicians can't be creative, but like in the creative world of you are the composer and arranger, you are the producer of a record, you are the performer on the record, you are the booking agent to booking tours and stuff after it, you are the promoter sending it out and making sure the world sees it. And any and every other aspect of, you can think of 5 or 6 things that are literal full-time jobs for other people that you do yourself, and yet you still have to find time to practice and write that music and arrange it and print it out and set up rehearsals and all of those other things. Listen, man, I don't like sugarcoating things with my students, and I won't hear. That's hard. And it isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
You literally spend your whole life and every waking moment thinking and working. That's intense. Literally, because it's if I'm not at a rehearsal or at a gig or practicing or composing music or this or that, I'm thinking about, all right, so I just recorded this record. Okay, I got to get all this information on my record label. Once they have it out, I got to start thinking about my tours that I'm going to be doing in the fall. Now, we're in the summer, so I got to be thinking about what fall gigs am I going to be booking, whether it's a tour or local gigs or whatever that are going to be promoting my record. And then, I have to think about what I'm going to personally do aside from what my record label is doing to promote it and push it for whatever level I want it to get to. It's just intense. You're literally thinking every moment about, what am I doing next? What's going to happen next? And that's hard, man.
Well, I think you're exactly describing, I don't know what a better description would be. the life of an entrepreneur.
Yes.
The life of an artist.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, that's just the way it goes.
That is
right?
the way it is.
That's
it's
the way it is.
intense.
Yeah.
And you know, you
Well,
gotta find your time, man, and take off, because otherwise you'll go crazy.
Right. Well, I got one final question for you. Okay. So, in thinking about all this and thinking about your recent, success and the exciting things that are happening at Kent State, and your recent record that's dropping when again? October 4th, right?
October 4th.
And this, milestone of turning 50, et cetera, is there a reinvention revelation that you can share with people? Something that you've learned about yourself or about being an artist or about the business along the way that you wouldn't have predicted or wouldn't have, it's caught you maybe off guard or some insight that you can share with people.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't say this is a recent thing yesterday, but this is a thing that for me over the years is that when I was younger, I mean, I've been very fortunate here. I apologize if it sounds like I'm tooting my horn a little bit here, but I've been very fortunate in my life to have played and worked with the top jazz players on the planet, to have, toured and done records and all this type of stuff. But I always felt personally like if I can very gladly and hopefully humbly say that really the only thing I haven't done as a musician, as a jazz musician, the only thing I haven't really done is I haven't been that side man with a 1%er, whoever, Dave Douglas or Joe Lovano or Dave Holland or this type of, where I was in that band as a side man touring, for years, playing every major club, every major festival throughout the year, being on the magazine covers, this or that. Like that's the only thing I haven't done has been that kind of a side man. I've been side man on many beautiful projects, but that kind of a thing, which very few people get to do, and that's okay, and, but like when I was younger, I thought that if I never did that, I wouldn't have been successful. And so, I held off looking for certain types of either more full-time or certain types of teaching gigs at the college level because I felt like if I did that, I would
You'd
not be in a
that
situation to be able to do that, which is not true because I could do one of those things now where I'm at Kent and still make it happen.
Right.
Because I understand things more now. But I thought I would not be successful. And I've come to understand that success means many, many different things, and that I've actually been fortunate in my life. If it's 1% of the jazz population that do what I just mentioned, it's probably 10% and less that I can say that don't get chances of doing the things that I've done.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
And I look at that now as look back and go, wow, man, that's pretty cool.
Right.
And I'm pretty lucky and should be pretty happy. And so now the revelation has been to me that I can still continue to do those things and be incredibly lucky and fortunate, and yet now focus the other half of my attention on being a mentor to other people so they understand that they can do that and still be successful.
Right.
And so that's my reimagination, my reinvention of myself, is I'm okay with everything I'm doing in my life and have done in my life and will continue to do in my life. I'm okay with all of that. And if nothing else happens, I can be happy with what I've accomplished. And that's my reimagination.
Cool. Well, it's a great insight too, in terms of just, holding on to, certain things that you just always thought that meant success or something like that, but kind of figuring it out along the way. And it's like, well, wait a second, there's a million ways to look at life and figure this out.
And more than others. And I want them to be successful now, because people don't look at that as being successful.
Right. And don't miss the success you're actually having.
Yeah.
Exactly. Really cool. Hey, well, it's been awesome having you on. If people want to learn more about Reinvented or what you're doing or where you're playing and touring and that kind of stuff, or want more information about Kent State, where would they go to get in touch with you?
An easy place is my website, which is just bobbyselvaggio.com. And I'm all over social media.
Okay.
And so, Jim, man, thank you so much, man.
Oh,
this was an
it.
absolute blast. I can't tell you, this type of conversation is I would love to do more of this kind of stuff, man.
Well, maybe we'll figure out a way to do it. I mean, because it's, there's a million other little aspects or questions I would have for you, or discussions I think are worthy for people to consider or just to listen to out there. So, thanks again. I'll have all the information in the show notes. Any other like social media handles you wanna hand out? Twitter, that kind of stuff.
It's just all Twitter and Facebook and all of that, Instagram, all that stuff is just under my name.
Okay,
so
very good. Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Jim Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. If you want to hear more, join our mailing list at jimjimsreinventionrevolution.com. See you next time, and remember, the revolution has just begun. So dig in, embrace the process of reinvention, and start realizing the success you've always dreamed of. Hey, revolutionaries, if you enjoyed today's episode and today's guest, let them know by commenting on their Facebook page, finding their Twitter handle or Instagram feed, and letting them know you heard them on Jim Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, and tell them what you got out of the episode, what you really liked, or how they inspired you. I know they would get a kick out of it, and will help others find the same value that you found.